Hi guys, it's me BT. Today what I'm going to be doing is starting the tutorial series on how to fly on VATSIM from an air traffic controller's perspective and from my personal point of view. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some tips, tricks and advice from my point of view that could help you become a better pilot and or controller on the VATSIM network. And today in this episode what we're going to start off by doing is walking through how you can file a flight plan onto VATSIM through simbrief, how I like to do it personally, and covering through some important details and what you need when you first log into the VATSIM network. So what I'm going to start off by doing is walking you through how to create your flight plan on simbrief, and then we'll cover through how to file the flight plan, and we're going to go into a bit of detail here into kind of what each segment is, what segments I use, what I don't use, and what they mean, whether or not they're important for your flight or important details that are carried across to VATSIM when you file them on the network. So we're going to get straight into it. When you go onto your simbrief account, assuming you have one, obviously there are multiple flight planning softwares and different things you can use. However, my preference being simbrief is the better one to use. You will click onto the new flight column here on the left hand side after logging into your account, and then you can enter into this page here. Now I personally have it as a preference set on dark mode, which is up here. It's just a little bit nicer to look at in my opinion, and obviously you can have it and set it up whatever way you want. So when you go to plan your flight, obviously there's a number of factors that you need to consider. First of all, who you're going to be flying with, the aircraft in which you are going to be flying, where you're flying from, where you're flying to, and some other bits and bobs of information that we will get in just a second. So for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to be doing a mock Ryanair flight out of Stansted to Manchester, just to make our life a little bit easier. So we're going to start off right at the top, and it's as simple as working our way down. You work your way through the list. The mandatory fields are the red fields, as you can see, but we'll go through just to make our lives a little bit easier when it comes to pre-filing on the network. So when it starts off in the airline column, this is your airline call sign. So for our example, it's going to be Ryanair, which is Romeo, Yankee, Romeo. Some other examples are EasyJet, which is EZY, Echo Zulu Yankee, or British Airways, Bravo, Alpha Whiskey, etc. And then you want your flight number, which is your 1 to 4 digit call sign. So for the purposes of this exercise, we'll do 1, 2, Alpha November. Then obviously you've got your departure section. So this is where you'd want to put your departure aerodrome ID. So for example, we're using Stansted today, which is Echo Golf Sierra Sierra. Now for those of you that don't know how these ICAO codes or ICAO codes, however you wish to pronounce it, work, you've got your first, which is your country identifier, which is your first two letters, which is Echo Golf in this case for the UK, and then your last two, which is your airport identifier being Sierra Sierra, which is obviously Stansted. Each airport has a corresponding ICAO code, and you will be able to find them if you're stuck by a simple Google search or something like Flight Radar, and they'll bring up your ICAO code if ever you're stuck with where you're going. So next is we want to put your arrival, which we're going to put Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, which is Manchester, and then we can just click away from that. And then that's our top thing set. Now, you can, if you wish to do so, plan in a manual alternate, but it's automatically set to auto, and that's absolutely fine. If you wish to set a departure time, then you are again welcome to do so. This is valid with kind of events and things like that on VATSIM, where you might have an off-block time. For example, you might have a slot, in this case today at, I don't know, 22:10, for example, and then you can pop that on there and that'll do some calculations for you. Now, for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to say this a lot, this recording, so just bear with me. We're going to be flying in the iFly 737 MAX 8. Now, when we select it through the aircraft type, you've got all of these different aircraft, and each one has its own variant or airframe within. So what you want to do is you want to find your relevant airframe. So in our case, with a 737 MAX 8, as you can see there, that'll load up lots of bits and bobs for us, including the map here showing our plan. I will go through that in just a second. And in here, you can have a look to see if there is any variants or airframes. So in this case, the 737 MAX 8 is fairly uniform, and it doesn't have any particular variants that are there designated for each aircraft. Now, for an example, you've got different things like your A320s, A321s, and each one of these might have a variant built into simbrief. For example, this one here has got the Phoenix and the Flight Factor, obviously Flight Factor being X-Plane, Phoenix being Microsoft Flight Sim, etc., etc. So you can plan it to whichever simulator you're using, whichever aircraft specifics you're using. I believe the 737-800 may also have PMDGs and Pro Sims as well. So lots of different variants which will each obviously have different factors and climb profiles, descent profiles, stuff like that. So it is relevant to make sure that you pick the closest profile that you can. So obviously you don't need to worry too much about all this kind of stuff. This is all your cost index information, the cruise information, and generally you don't need to worry. And this is where it confirms your ATC call sign. You can change it, however, you've set it by going up here, which is Ryanair 1 Alpha November, as you can see there. So you don't need to worry about changing that call sign there. Now this bit is quite important. Now, the reason why this is important is because it covers the AIRAC cycle. Now, for those of you that are completely new to flight simming and might not know what an AIRAC cycle is, it relates to your nav data, your navigation data. That is something that when you fly on VATSIM, it is required to be up to date. Essentially, what nav data is it's like the real world. It's the data which contains all of the information on all these waypoints like Dane, Cushy, TNT, which is Trent otherwise, Elvos, all those kind of waypoints are all contained in one big block of navigational data, and that gets downloaded into your aircraft, into your simulator, and that is updated every single month, and the relevant AIRAC cycle is updated. So in this case, it's the 13th AIRAC cycle of 2024, which relates to 26th December to the 22nd of January. Now, for your nav data, there are a couple of main sources. However, in my personal preference, I choose Navigraph. It is a subscription service, but it also comes with simbrief and some various other programs, which I will show you later on, that also provide some great assistance when it comes to flying and planning your flight. But when it comes to updating your navigational data, Navigraph I find is the best tool around to do that, and as such it will update your simbrief as well, which is why we're on the up-to-date AIRAC cycle. Now moving on, you can see that you've got some customization here, which you can use the units, flight maps, types of flights, flight rules if you're going VFR or you're flying IFR to VFR, how many alternates you want. If you know the weather's particularly bad, you can pick 2 alternates, and your estimated taxi out, taxi in time. So as we're flying from Stansted to Manchester, we know that the taxi out time is likely not to be particularly long. Even if we are on a separate runway, one of the further runways, it's still not likely to be that long. So you can pick and choose your taxi out time here, and that will just help you with your fuel calculations at a later stage. Now, in this particular circumstance, it's also generated us 20 minutes of taxi out and 8 minutes of taxi in. Generally, I don't tend to touch that time. That's down to simbrief, and I will show you what I do in terms of fuel calculations a little bit later on. Now, further on, you can see you've got your on-block time, departure, arrival, altitude, passengers, freight, payload, 0 fuel weight. Now, all of these columns are automatically set to auto, and they will populate once your flight plan is created, and it will basically give you a random weight and balance. Now, you don't need to worry about your block time. That is the estimated time from block to block, which is essentially once your chocks are removed to once the chocks are placed at the other end. That will just give you a rough idea. Obviously, that does depend on how you do things. Your departure runway gets automatically calculated based on the winds. So in this case, the winds favour a runway 22 departure from Stansted and a runway 23 right arrival into Manchester. Now, one little cheat that I do tend to use is if there are no air traffic controllers online at the time at the airport, then you can go ahead and go onto Flight Radar, which is a good source of information for real-world traffic, and they will point you in the right direction as to what runways are in use in real life, and as such, what runways are most appropriate to be used in the simulator, especially if you are running real-world weather. Now, I will just say all of this information is based on the assumption that you are using real-world weather. This will not be as accurate if you are using manual weather or clear skies, something like that. So please do bear that in mind. Now, altitude again gets automatically calculated based on your weight and balance, the prevailing winds in the high altitudes, and also the most appropriate altitude based on the distance of flight. So that will likely be somewhere in the region between about 200 and 300 once we get up to cruising altitude. Now, if you are someone like me, my personal preference is I will either amend the freight or payload to be a higher weight because I enjoy flying the aircraft when they are heavier. But you can, of course, edit your passengers to an amount, auto, none, full, or you can just type in a number, for example, 152, just at a random number. You can add in your freight up to 22,153 kilos in this example, and you can put as much freight in or as little, and payload. Obviously, if you change all of this to full, it will kick up an error telling you that you can't have freight and payload at the same max weight, so you pick and choose. It's all fairly easy. You can't really go wrong with it. because it is fairly foolproof, the whole system. So we'll go on the basis that our freight is maxed out at 22,153 kilos. So the next segment will go on to fuel planning. Again, everything is by default set to auto. You've got your contingency, reserve, taxi fuel, block fuel, arrival fuel, and a load of other fuel that you can decide to plan in if you wish to do so. It's really up to you how much detail you put in here. If you want to spend loads of time on your flight planning stage and try and keep it as real life as you can, you're more than welcome to do it. But generally, when it comes to this kind of fuel, I tend to let simbrief do the calculations, and the only things that I will change are either the contingency or reserve fuel, and I will either put that somewhere in the region of 30 minutes or 45 minutes, depending on what's going on. In this case, we'll put 30 minutes because we're so close to various alternates, Liverpool, Leeds, that kind of stuff. And that will basically just give you an extra 30 minutes of fuel based on what you don't need, to give you extra holding time and stuff like that. And you can also put that in the reserve fuel section, but that does give you an automatic reserve. So the next thing you've got is text entries. You really don't need anything in there. That is basically just to give yourself some extra detail. Again, if you really want to put some detail in, this will all come out on the printed flight plan afterwards. And then you've got your route page. Now, this is where it will allow you to choose through some of the suggested routes, some of which will be recommended, some of them won't. So as you can see from the side here, I'm having to tilt my head because I can't see it. Yes, so you've got 2 NATS recommended routes and then 3 simbrief recommended routes. The route it has, however, selected is this route here, which takes the Utava 1 Romeo departure out of Stansted and comes in on the Elvo or Elvos 1 Mike arrival into Manchester. Now, what it's done is it's analysed that route and it's checked its validity against the AIRAC cycle, which is the most up-to-date navigational data, and it has confirmed that that route is valid and it shouldn't have any problems. And it's also calculated that it's 142 nautical miles in length, which is 12% additional to the Crowfly route. So essentially the direct line, it's an extra 12% on top of the direct line through. Now, there is, of course, lots of other information you can put in here. You've got route finders that you can do. There are alternate airports that you can change, ETOPS scenarios, historical weathers that you can input from things like Active Sky and other parameters, but I don't touch any of that. And this is pretty much where you need to be with your flight plan in order to have a functioning flight. So what you can see from here is you can see the general route as it's planned out. So you can see we go from Stansted, we follow the departure SID, and then that will take us up to Manchester and more or less straight into the ILS. Now, obviously, it does leave out some information, including the ILS's route and all that kind of stuff. It's a very rough drawing, but it does show you the necessary bits that you need to see. So once you've got your flight plan looking this kind of way, you've got everything there and you're happy with the details that have been inputted, you can go ahead and press Generate Flight. And that will take a few seconds to generate everything that it needs to do, and then it will switch you to another screen. So you can see all of the information that you just inputted has been solidified, essentially, and you can see the final figures that you've been given. So in this case, you can see your flight number and call sign given there, the departure, arrival, alternate being Heathrow, your aircraft, block time, how much time it recommends you'll be in the air, which is 38 minutes, and then obviously your departure and arrival time based on the data that you inputted. In this one, it's given us an initial altitude of 18,000 feet, so just under what I initially predicted, with a cruise profile of CI31, and obviously loads of other various information that you can or cannot choose to input into your aircraft should you wish to do so. Again, detailing the different bits and bobs like the AIRAC cycle, the units, and ETOPS scenarios. This is your load sheet. This tells you what it recommends your en route burn is going to be, so 1.2 tonnes of fuel, your passenger count, which is giving us an error. So you can see that in relevant to the max takeoff weight of the aircraft, we might likely be higher than either the takeoff weight, max landing weight, or zero fuel weight. So we might need to reduce the amount of passengers or reduce the amount of payload that we onboarded. And that is obviously down to whatever you decide to do. But you can see all the information here. So the estimated zero fuel weight, estimated takeoff weight, landing weight, block fuel, which is there, which is 4.2 tonnes. And obviously the various things that you can see here. So it's not entirely clear what the problem is. It could be a case of its centre of gravity problem, but that's an issue for the aircraft should you get to it. This is your primary route. This is your route as it reads. So the only bit you don't need is this. So it would be the Utava 1 Romeo. You copy that. That is the route that ATC would need. The rest of it is obviously assumed on the basis that you've inputted your departure and arrival. Now, you've got all of this stuff. Again, if you want to look through it, you can. It doesn't serve any purpose for me, and I don't tend to use it. Now, you've got the PDF flight plan here. It's a very long document, similar to what people would get in real life, pilots would get in real life, and you can see in this particular circumstance, it's 37 pages long. We're not going to go through 37 pages, you'll be pleased to know. Now, you can see here there's a lot of information. It's not particularly nice when it comes to its formatting, but the main key points, if you wish to use a PDF document, are as follows. You can see on here, you've got the planned fuel page. So you can see the trip fuel, the contingency fuel that we planned on board, which is 988 kilos, your alternate fuel, which it's given you 1.1 kilos, 1.1 tons, apologies, and your final reserve fuel, which is FinRes here, which is 703 kilograms, giving you a minimum takeoff fuel of 4,066 kilos, which gives you 2 hours and 19 minutes of fuel burn. It recommends your estimates your takeoff with that amount of fuel, incorporating the extra 191 kilos of fuel that you'll on board for your taxi, with a final fuel of 4,257 kilograms on the block. That's a lot of information, but essentially what you'll need to know is when you go into your aircraft, your block fuel is going to be 4259, or basically round it up. Now, you get a little bit more information here, so this is giving you the route to Heathrow if you were going to divert. It gives you the flight level, it gives you the route, Samba 1 Romeo, Honolulu, etc. And the 27 right would be the runway they'd like to use. You can also see your route here. And there's other various bits and bobs, all this kind of stuff here. So your out time, off block, on block, in block time. You've got your packs here, your payload, zero fuel weight, fuel, takeoff weight, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got each waypoint. You've got latitude, longitude, you've got flight level that it's expecting you to be at, the distance, and then a lot of other information that you really don't necessarily need. What this does show is that it shows the estimated fuel on board, and it shows the fuel burn that you can expect via the route. And there's not a huge amount more information that you need to be looking in here. It gives you all sorts of like landing weight information. It gives you like NOTAMs and other bits of information. And finally, towards the bottom, you can see, when we get there, it's quite a ways, it will show you the route, it will show you the alternate based on the route, and it will also show you the estimated and current winds that are predicted en route, both low level and high level. So you can see this one is flight level 140, this is what the winds are doing. Obviously, the more bars there are, I think it corresponds to 25 knots of wind per bar, and the direction they're travelling in. Obviously, this one's flight level 180, this one is flight level 240, and it shows you the general winds as you go en route. So that covers the PDF document of your flight plan. You don't have to use that, you can get the information you need from the load sheet here, but that covers that basic thing. Now, what you want here is, in order to get your flight plan sent to VATSIM and to pre-file on the network ready for when you log in, there are two ways to get there. It's nice and easy. You can either press the 5th button along, which is pre-file on a network, or you can scroll down to press the same button down here, say pre-file on a network. This button will only bring you down here. Now, this gives you your 5 options: VATSIM, IVAO, Pilot Edge, POSCON, or say Intentions.ai, which is obviously the AI air traffic control. And in this case, we want VATSIM, so you press pre-file. That would usually take you to your login page, but I've already done that for the purposes of the video. So you press login, you allow the data and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is a little bit different to what some of you might have been used to. It's no longer as simple as just putting a little bit of information into your pilot client. You've now got a full flight plan file page with lots and lots and lots of information you would need to put in. Now, because we've done this through simbrief, all of the relevant and important information has been all fully inputted. So you can see that the operator's Ryanair, the registration of the aircraft is that. You can customize that, of course. The off-block time, CPDLC, and then it puts all the information in around the fuel endurance, the airspeed, altitudes, en route time, off-block time, etc., including the route details there. Once you've checked to make sure that all of this information is accurate and true to what you need it for, then you will be ready to just simply press File Flight Plan. And all that will do is that will pop up with a prompt up here saying Flight Plan filed, ready to go. And that is as simple as it is to file a flight plan. I know this video has been close to about 20 minutes, and that goes through very slowly the in-detail bits and bobs that you need in order to file a valid simbrief flight plan through to VATSIM. Now, it is important that you have up-to-date nav data, and when you are, of course, using the network, it's important to use charts, but we'll go into details of what they are and how they're used in later videos. Part 2 will cover the joining the network, ensuring that your flight plan is filed, and also communicating with air traffic control to gather IFR clearances. I'd like to thank you for watching part 1 of the VATSIM tutorial series from the perspective of a hobby pilot and air traffic controller on VATSIM, and I'll see you guys next time.